Like I said earlier on, Dr. Fayé Briggs is the CEO of Niminq. It's a data center architecture and data analytics company. And Afristec, developing an open social commerce super app platform for the African digital economy. A warm welcome to you, Dr. Fayé. We also have Tesi Rusagara, who, like I've also said earlier on, is the managing director of Kigali Innovation City, whose mission is to nurture and accelerate Rwanda's innovation ecosystem. We also have with us Mosa Mkhize, who is a public policy advisor for a leading US-based law firm, Covington and Burling, and she's based in Johannesburg, where she provides strategic policy, regulatory, and dispute resolution advice to a broad range of clients doing business across sub-Saharan Africa. Mark is the Middle East and Africa Director for Emerging Markets Expansion and Transformation at Microsoft Corporation. Mark also is responsible for identifying and executing strategic engineering co-innovation opportunities for Microsoft in Africa and the Middle East. And Didier is here with us. He's the Chief of Technology and Innovation Officer at Smart Africa, the Secretariat. We all know it. It's a Pan-African organization mandated by Africans heads of state and government to create a single digital market for Africa. So thank you very much. The previous panel kind of ate into our time, so I don't know if that means we have an extra 30 minutes, but we have 1 hour, and then, like you saw earlier on, a Q&A session. So thank you very much. And the opening question is really a broad-based question before we dive into a bit more detailed questions, and it's to do with the issues of trust as a factor in data distribution, equitable, fair data distribution, and looking at governance. So if you could just start off by telling us, and I'll start off with you, Tesi, ladies first. What are some of the challenges in this landscape, in this ecosystem, when you're looking at governance and trust in the role of data distribution?
Thanks. Testing. Is this on? Thanks, Diana, and good afternoon, everyone. So maybe I'll start with a story. So I think in the past few years, we've seen more digital lenders enter the market. And so you'll find that you're able to get a micro loan in some cases, less than 10 minutes. So a lot of the data that these lending platforms are using is what we'd call non-traditional. So some of it is coming from your devices. So for example, where it will track your location. Other data is behavioral data. So are you paying your bills? Do you read your terms and conditions? So some of you might not get those loans. But really, they look at over 250 data points. And so based off that, you're able to get the loan. At the same time, they also get access to your contacts. So when you don't pay the loan, they then send text messages, sometimes to anyone in your contact book. So it can be your employer, your potential employer, your employees, your family members, and so on. So I think on one hand, we're seeing innovation that's increasing access to finance, especially for people who've not been served. But on the other hand, it's a significant breach of privacy and data. And I think that's the challenge that we're facing today, because regulation sometimes will lag the innovation, and we do want the innovation, we want the innovative solutions. But at the same time, when you look at these companies, you're often raising, let's say from venture capitalists, they want to see exponential growth. Exponential growth depends on your ability to monetize this data or to use it to collect your loans in this case. So finding that balance between how do we still support innovation, but how do we make sure that there's privacy, how do we look at how this data is used, how it's collected, how it's shared is still important. And I think that's the challenge that we're facing today. And it's a lot of work for the Data Protection Office, but it's good that we now have such institutions to help us navigate these waters.
Thank you, Tesi. Over to you, Mark.
Testing. All right, cool. So first of all, I think I'll lead by saying it's really exciting to be here. Thanks for having me, right? And the future is here, right? The Fourth Industrial Revolution, Industry 4.0. We're actually living it already, right? From smart intelligent machines working in smart factories alongside subject matter experts to really streamline processes. I mean, we are in the golden age of AI, right? And when I think about artificial intelligence and the capabilities that it unlocks, a lot of this is fueled by data, right? And a lot of data that is required to make progress in this field is deeply personal data in some cases, right? So, for instance, I mean, I think the previous panelists, they spoke about, your location data, your health data, where you work, and things like that. These are the kind of information that is required to give you deeply personalized experiences. Even in healthcare, when you're looking at personalized cancer treatment, for instance, requires a lot of very deeply personal information, right, to be shared. Right, so, and when you think about that, and you think about the role that data plays in the revolution that is upon us, right, it is very important that, this data is handled in a trustworthy manner. So in other words, for customers to give you their data, there must be that element that they can trust you with the data, right? And for us at Microsoft, we believe that privacy is a fundamental human right. Right? We believe that all of our products and services should be built from the ground up with privacy in mind, right? And part of that also is, we talk about laws, we talk about regulations that basically ensure that companies that basically collect customer data are doing it in a responsible manner. But at the end of the day, the onus is really in the hands of these companies that collect this data to make sure that this data is being handled in a responsible manner, in a respectful manner. And we think that generally, I mean, there are 4 principles on which, a trust framework can really be established. First one, certainly, is the fact that companies have to be transparent with regards to how they share, how they collect the data, how they use it, right, and what kind of data they're collecting, right? The second thing, of course, is that, customers also have to be empowered, right, to be able to, update their data, delete their data, move their data. Essentially, data is fully in control. A customer should have 100% control of their data. And thirdly, the companies also have to basically be responsible about how they use this data. So these are the principles. So I talked about, there are 4 principles. I'm going to mention the 4th one. The companies also have to be responsible about how they use and how they share this data. And last but not the least, you need an empowered regulator, right, who's able to basically take action, right, on bad actors that basically violates, this kind of principles. So a fully funded and well-funded and well-empowered regulator to kind of be able to ensure adherence to these policies that are created. So I think in the revolution that is upon us, which is fueled by data, right, I think it's very, very important and critical that a very solid trust framework is in place to really ensure that our customers' data is safeguarded.
Thank you, Mark. Dr. Fayé, as CEOs of companies in data architecture and data analytics, what are your perspectives on some of the gaps in this ecosystem?
As pretty much a designer, we look at what is the sphere, what is the degrees of freedom you have in innovating when you're dealing with data. Because if you take an example, you could have a corporation that basically stores the data of different countries in a different jurisdiction than those countries. What happens if there's a breach? What right would a country have over a data that is stored somewhere else? So those type of issues would really come up. And so one of the things we have done to look at how do we create better trust and this protect the privacy and the governance is really focusing on making sure that our product, which is a social commerce platform, can really be stored in a country's data center on-prem or put in a private cloud that they have full control over. Because the issue we have is there's a lot of social media or social commerce data that is really out there, but where are they stored? Do you have jurisdiction? If there is a breach, what rights do you have? So those things actually can create some problems. And one thing about data is that if you constrain the privacy to too much, you might really limit innovation, right? So it's a delicate balance between allowing people to innovate, but have the privacy. And one thing we've done with a number of our clients where we really deal with data analytics and machine learning is that even for medical institutions or for banks, is that the anonymization is very important if you want to do any type of analytics, that will give you insight so that you protect people's private data. So I would recommend, from my mind, that as much as possible that countries go towards having data sovereignty, where the data can be more within that country's jurisdiction. And that's one of the things that we're really trying to promote in our product.
Interesting. And you, Mosa, also from your perspective as strategic policy advisor, gaps in when it comes to data governance and the role of trust in the distribution of equitable data.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure. Oh, thank you so much. I think, over the past decade, we really have seen great acceleration in terms of the digitization of pretty much every aspect of our lives, right? So whether that's in the financial services, whether that's commerce, whether it's healthcare, and certainly in education. And consequently, what this has meant is that, data plays an absolutely critical commodity. So this rapid change has basically, introduced complexities around, how it is that it's governed, right, from a data governance standpoint. And so what we do at Covington is track these developments and assess and assist clients that are doing business across Africa with navigating the complexities. And how we do that is through partnering with governments and organizations like the C4IR, for example, in really leveraging international best practice to create these enabling regulatory environments. So I think it's become very clear from all of those discussions today that there's abundant opportunity and potential for us to leverage technology for economic development across the continent. And whilst significant progress has been made, there certainly are a number of opportunities for us to do even better. And I would kind of categorize the challenges into three groups, right? The first one is around regulations, right? The reality is that whilst many countries have progressed, right, including Rwanda, given that's the reasons why we're here today, many countries have actually not, right? And so many countries, for example, don't have what is required from a regulatory standpoint as being a key part of creating an enabling technology ecosystem. The second one that I think has been spoken about across multiple discussions is really around harmonization of policies. If we really are to leverage, kind of ease the ease of doing business across the continent, particularly for, the engine of our economies, which are the small and medium enterprises, we really need to have interoperable frameworks that make doing business easy. And the spin-offs of that, of course, are going to be growing our economies. And I think then lastly, and this was alluded as well by Minister Paula Ingabire, is just around, having partnerships, right? Partnerships with government, with the private sector, with NGOs, because the reality is that government can't do it alone, right? And so those have really been our reflections as we've been, keeping track of the developments and also assisting clients that are doing business across the continent.
Thank you very much, Mosa. Over to you, Didier.
Thank you very much. I think my fellow panelists have covered a lot of the challenges which are faced, but at the national level, but also I think she also touched at the continental level. I'd like just to add that there's been a lot of progress, especially with countries, to create the right legal and regulatory framework. Example of Rwanda with the data governance, the data protection law, data protection and privacy law. Today we have over 32 countries in Africa who have this framework in place. It's one thing to have the legal framework in place, it's another thing to have the ability to enforce what has been passed as a law. And we've seen in many countries challenges. Either there is no data protection authority in place, and even when they are there, they don't necessarily have all the means to actually implement and to enforce the law that has been passed. So the issues about data protection is still something quite new, and there's still a lot of effort, a lot of gaps that need to be filled to make sure that we have all the means to enforce it. But there are also broader challenges. Infrastructure. We're talking about data, but data need to reside somewhere. We're talking about data centers. Today, Africa accounts only for 1% of the total multi-tenant data center capability in the world. Is insignificant. We're talking about a continent that has over 1.3 billion people. So what happened? Most of the time, data that is generated are hosted outside the country. And starting by your phone, every day at a certain time in the night, your phone is backing up. Data that you have on your phone is actually being hosted somewhere. Whenever you take a picture, for example, it's hosted somewhere else. So it's, we don't have enough critical infrastructure that can really help us also to talk about the data sovereignty. We still have challenges at that, but not only that, also the key infrastructure to access the data. We're talking about connectivity, fiber optic, and so on. Yes, for the last 10 years, there have been a lot of development. We're not in the same situation we had in 2007 when Africa didn't have any fiber submarine connectivity connecting the continent. A lot of things have been done. It's acknowledged, but the continent is massive. There's still a lot that needs to be done to ensure that connectivity and the data is also affordable. Accessing data is affordable. I just want to conclude also on the second part of innovation, because it's a balance. It's a balance that is sometimes a bit difficult to achieve. On one hand, privacy is important for citizens, businesses, and government. But on the other side, we need to do it, to protect it in a way that doesn't stifle innovation, doesn't prevent innovation actually to happen, because the real value today in the era we're living in is really the ability to extract value from data. So if we put too much control in a way that is so difficult to actually come with an innovation, actually we're defeating the purpose. Today the leading economies are data economies, because they made use of data to build those giant companies that we are talking about. So it's really a balance that we need always to keep in mind, so that on one hand we protect data for people, citizens, and for government, sovereign data, but on the other side it doesn't actually limit also the innovation.
Yeah, it's Didier, it's alarming. It's sobering actually when you talk about accounting for less than 1% or around 1% of global data. And you know, thank you for just opening up the conversation in terms of the challenges from jurisdiction to, you know, empowered regulators to infrastructure. The challenges abound, but like most of you have said, there's still opportunities to, you know, tap into these opportunities and then try and fix this. I want us to just talk briefly on AFCFTA. It's unfortunate that the previous panel, they mentioned it's gloomy. It doesn't really look good when it comes to this, to data, you know, information and distribution. But when we're talking about the few countries that have laws, data privacy and protection laws, I think they're around 8. My question, and I'll start with you, Dr. Fayé, what do you think needs to be done in order to sort of bring these countries that have these laws together to harmonize some of these laws and policies to ensure, you know, free data flow across the continent, also within trusted frameworks?
One of the things we're trying to do, especially as we develop our products, is even though we adhere to data sovereignty, you could have, let's say, either in the private cloud or a data center, let's say in Rwanda, but you have another one in Kenya, but you have to talk to each other or to other countries. Now, and you could do that for various reasons. One could be to actually have the so-called African digital economy with the African free trade area that we're talking about. To enable that, there are some things you have to share, some data. For example, you could pay either by credit card or you could provide your own personal information, which can now go across multiple countries. How do you, provide that data protection in the countries that you actually have to deal with? So my feeling is that we can have, a number of countries have already set up these data protection laws and so on, but there's still a need in Africa to come together to sort of outline where do we agree on, what's the common denominator, right? If we can at least adhere to that common denominator, we might be able to triage it and the rest of it to the point that we may find that there's very little difference, right, in some of these countries. And those little differences, we as innovators can accommodate it in our design. But if it is totally diametrically opposite, it makes it very difficult for designers to really design in such a way that you can support the after. Those are the kind of things that we have to discuss. Yes, it's important to have internal laws, but we also have to try to agree if we can share some of these basic laws with other countries so that it would really promote free trade.
Yes, Mosa.
Thank you. If I can maybe build upon that, we recently carried out some analysis, right, and looking at, trying to actually quantify the opportunity and figuring out whether they actually exist, that opportunity actually exists. And what we found is, if you look, for example, at data protection or even data localization, there actually are, to Doctor's point, there are multiple similarities actually, which can actually be leveraged, right, as we seek out achieving this harmonization. So one such example is we found that South Africa, Kenya, Senegal, and I think one more other jurisdiction, which has just slipped my mind, we actually found that they had commonality as it related to those points, right? And the reason why that is because a lot of them kind of borrowed elements from the GDPR, right? Another example is relating to, consent, right? There are actually a lot of similarities, absolutely a lot of divergence as well, but I think the point really is that there is the opportunity to leverage these synergies and then figure out how to work around the areas of divergence. We are of course, know that it's a priority for the AFCFTA Secretariat, but it's just around making that actually happen in order to leverage those similarities.
Mark or Tesi, would you like to weigh in on that, or should we just move to the next question? But just tapping onto what Dr. Fayé and Mosa have said.
No, I think they've captured everything. The one element I would add is, well, for us, one of the key stakeholders at KIC in the ecosystem is the young startups and the innovators. And there's already a lot of difficulty in entering new markets. So, we would want to reduce that friction for them. And I think if you have to now navigate multiple, data protection, regulatory and legal frameworks, it's even more difficult. So how we make sure that we are also supporting and thinking of these startups as we think about AFCFTA, but even just general, as we bring them along on this journey and see how to reduce both the information costs, but actually costs of compliance would be key.
Thank you. So my next question is to you, Tesi, before others can ask. And maybe it's because your response now more or less led into it. And it's looking at, on the continent, looking at youth, looking at specific populations. And, youth are the future. And my question is to you is when it comes to this field of skills and training in terms of being able to generate data and also monetize it, how do we ensure that youth are not left behind? Talent and youth, and what are some of your opinions on this?
Yeah, it's a great question because we need them to generate the data. We need people to interpret the data, to monetize, to secure the data. We're also talking about that today. I guess at KIC, part of the talent and universities are the anchor of how do we build the innovation ecosystem. And we've started with universities. So from Carnegie Mellon to Ames to University of Rwanda and African Leadership University, they're all focused on both the soft skills around leadership, but also the hard technical skills, engineering, data science, cybersecurity, and so on. So I believe we can't, as we talk about all these new technologies, as we talk about generating data, we can't steer away from who is going to build this, who's going to, who's building the solutions that will generate more data, who's going to secure our data, and talent is part of that. And building our student base is very Pan-African, so also making sure that we're building that talent across the board, not just Rwandan talent, but Pan-African talent. So I think that's very important. The second is, how do we make sure that these talent pools are also integrating with industry, integrating with government. It's good today to see like the Rwanda Coding Academy here in the room, because we can't have these conversations without the young people, without the skills that we're building. A good example is during COVID. The COVID task force leveraged Ames, they leveraged University of Rwanda to come up with a pool testing method for COVID, right? And that was based on algorithms. And at a time when, borders were closed and people were not able to get around and you can't even import talent, knowing that you can rely on your talent base is quite important. And so we need to constantly make sure that we're investing in our talent pools and generations of talent pools to be able to, like we said, not just generate the data, not to just monetize, but also secure the data that we're talking about. Even the infrastructure that Didier had mentioned earlier, we need to make sure that we can, not even if we're not building the infrastructure, but even maintaining some of this infrastructure and eventually building infrastructure for the continent. So it's a very important piece of the puzzle when it comes to data protection and making sure that along the way we have the right talent and we're constantly building the right talent, but also making stakeholders from the private sector to government are coordinating and collaborating with those institutions is quite key.
Thank you. Mark, my next question is to you regarding the socio-economic benefits of data sharing and access in the digital world, but also looking at inclusivity, making sure no one is left behind. And yes, Tesi just talked about youth. The previous panel talked about, making it as equitable as possible. So yeah, over to you.
Absolutely. I was actually just going to also jump on to layer onto what Tesi had just shared, because sometimes we think, okay, the proliferation of the data sets that exist and the availability of the technology just automatically results in improved outcomes. But that's not the case, right? In some cases, organizations sit on all this data, right? But they're not able to basically derive the insights, right, from the data to basically improve the outcomes. So the importance of, having a very skilled, base or developing a pool of talent that's able to adequately interpret and, generate insights and innovate on top of the data sets that exist cannot be overemphasized. So it's super critical. And I think to that point, I also wanted to kind of, spotlight some of the things we're doing, right? We have this partnership with Zindi Africa, which again is about building a community of Pan-African data scientists. I believe there are about 70,000 plus, members of that community now and growing, mostly focused on youth. Right, and again, giving them, the skills, giving them the talent that is essentially required to be able to thrive in this, Industry 4.0 that we're in. Right. Now, what you said about, data, the divide that exists. Right. It's known as, we used to talk about the digital divide. Now we talk about the data divide. Right. The data divide essentially, basically speaks to the fact that, there are countries or there, countries that basically have access to, or they have, these data sets that are able to help them make informed decisions and are able to basically improve, more or less the outcomes for their citizens, versus other countries that do not necessarily have those capabilities in place. So what should we be doing to basically enhance, basically ensuring there's some sort of equity amongst more or less like the data haves and the data have-nots, right? And I think there's a lot to be done in that space, right? So things like the open data initiatives and also basically, interoperability and collaboration that exists between, both the haves and the have-nots is super critical for us to be able to basically make advances in this space, right? So again, I think in that regard, right, in ensuring that, more or less, the explosion of data that we have that is helping to basically improve, people's lives all over, and essentially yielding or helping us to basically, reap the dividends of Industry 4.0, we really need to ensure that, we are creating more or less that, that mechanism or that framework that allows, collaboration to actually happen, right? Shared experiences to be shared across countries that have and countries that do not necessarily have. And I think, again, riding on, the benefits of the open data framework can really help to really open up a lot of these advantages to some of the less privileged.
Thank you, Mark. Mosa, my question to you is really looking at the work that you do, or companies like Covington, Burling do across the continent. And, a lot of people in Rwanda or across the continent are looking at Rwanda's recently, gazetted the new data protection and privacy law. What is the involvement, to a certain degree, of a company like yours or where you work in helping, put forward this law and looking not only at it coming through, but also what it expects to do in Rwanda as well?
Thank you very much. It was honestly our sheer privilege to have been part of the process. So we partnered with the C4IR pretty much after the draft was published for public comment. And what we then did was to partner with the government and had over several months, lots of engagements with the Law Commission, the Central Bank, the C4IR, and also solicited input from various multinational companies, right? These are multinational companies that have plans and interests in really investing in the long term in Rwanda. And so we basically, kind of presented international best practice and went through some of the aspects of the draft which could present, kind of hindrances to what it is that the government was trying to achieve. And in so doing, reflected on existing frameworks and went through, for example, with international data transfers, the draft was going to present challenges, for the ecosystem. And so now, it's absolutely amazing that we're here today and to celebrate this huge moment for the country. And we really look forward to our continued partnership with the C4IR and with the Rwandan government as they move to the next phase of implementation.
Thank you very much. Didier, the final question before we go to our audience for any questions they may have is really if you could share with us, what Smart Africa is doing to create a harmonized framework for data protection across the continent, and just also showing the benefits of how we can, as a global economy, benefit from this. And I think what we have seen a lot today is the lack of this, continentally speaking. So really interested to hear what Smart Africa is doing.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Maybe before responding to that question, for the people in this room who don't know Smart Africa, it's a Pan-African organization headquartered here in Kigali, working with 32 countries, over 50 private sector companies, and also development partner and a wide range of partners with a single vision, working together to create one market, a single digital market for Africa. For it to happen, data governance has an important role, and that's why one of the work we did was to create data protection and privacy guidelines. So leveraging what African Union has done with the Malabo Convention in 2014, the GDPR and other frameworks, and the recent data protection framework, which was the data policy framework, which was approved by the AU. We created a set of guidelines to support countries, because countries are working actively on creating an adequate environment, but most of the time what they do, they try to see what has worked and what has not worked in other places. So these guidelines are helping a lot of countries today to develop the right data privacy and data protection policy frameworks that they are currently doing. We also work with countries, providing input when they're in the process of developing their own data privacy and protection frameworks or laws. We've also recently embarked in the broader data governance, because we consider data protection and privacy as a subset of the whole data governance. So we currently working with countries to develop national data governance strategies. And this is also a work in progress. For it, the way we work with, as I mentioned, a various range of partners, but they're also champion countries who are also able to, using peer learning, to also share the experience with others. I mentioned earlier infrastructure, which is a major challenge in some part of Africa, from data centers, connectivity. It's also one of our key focus. For the moment, we have a project of interconnecting different countries in the continent, ensuring that each country at least connects to 2 or more of its neighbors. Why? Because today we have a lot of intra-African traffic moving first out of the continent before coming back to Africa. I'm sure people in this room, if you take your phone and you call someone in Benin or in Côte d'Ivoire, most likely your call is going to go first through London or Amsterdam or Mumbai before actually coming back to another country in Africa. So this is simply because we don't have enough infrastructure in place. So we're working to attract investment from public investment, from government, but also from partners to really put the right infrastructure for the digital economy to thrive. The last action that we do is capacity building, because all of these are quite new. And I mentioned earlier, some of the authorities in charge of enforcing these laws, these legal frameworks, sometimes don't have the means or enough capabilities internally to deliver the mandate. So that's also part of our work. Recently, just about 2 weeks ago, we signed with the network of data protection authorities of Africa an MOU to support them and to build capabilities of that organization, which regroups all the data protection authorities of the continent. Now, talking about the other aspect of your question about how Africa can collectively benefit from the global data economy. First of all, it's important to understand that the data economy is huge. We're talking about an estimated $30 trillion globally. And Africa accounts for a very small % of it. So for it to happen, we think about, there are 2 things which are important. We talk about over 50 countries in Africa. If our data protection and privacy frameworks are not harmonized, there's a likelihood that it will be very difficult for a company like Afristec, for example, which is in e-commerce, to be able to work between a country and another country. So there's an important task of harmonizing, creating predictability for the private sector, so that when they invest in a continent, in a country in the continent, they can predict also how they're going to work with another country. Think about it this way. I think David here was mentioning about the data protection laws. There are incentives. There are also provisions when data is not properly handled. Multiplied by 54 countries or 55 countries. If you're a company today, you want to invest in Africa, you probably think about investing in China or in the US because it's one framework. Much easier to predict than actually coming to Africa. So harmonization is very, very important to make sure that this works well. The second part, I think, is allowing cross-border data flow. Very important. And I'll also try to give a very simple example. Today, when you do your COVID test, when you travel to Kenya and they ask you your COVID test, you show them the COVID test, but how do they know that this COVID test is genuine, right? Or whether you simply didn't change your name with a photo editing software. well, we all know that there's a QR code, but how many scan this QR code with the ability to be sure that that's a genuine COVID test result? Why it doesn't happen? Most likely, the systems are not integrated. If you want to open a bank account, or you're a company who would like to open to start operation in another country, it will be useful, for example, for that country to know whether, if you say that you're based in Rwanda and you're extending, let's say, in Kenya, how do they know? How do they know that your ID that you present to the bank, except from physically verifying it or photocopying it for record, how do they know that it's a valid ID card? All of this happened because we don't have enough interconnectivity, and we need really a trust framework to allow countries to be able to exchange this cross-border data. Actually, one thing to avoid, and I think it's important to also have that mindset, is that yes, it's important to create a national framework, but we're talking about a 1.3 billion population in the continent. If you want to create giant private sector companies, we need also to think about allowing data to cross in a secure way that still protect the data, the citizens, the businesses, the sovereign data, but let's also think about the economic dimension. So that's part of the work we do, harmonizing and also creating a trust framework. Currently, we're working on the Smart Africa Trust Alliance. It's really a trust framework which will allow public sector and private sector to securely exchange data, but to unlock the benefits that we're talking about with the size of the continent.
I just have one last question before we ask our audience if they have questions, and it's really to kind of take us a few steps back, looking at political will. Listening to all of you, Didier, you've talked about the massive potential benefits of this digital economy, and just also looking at data in particular. And we know that one way it's also driven forward is through governance and trust by data protection and privacy laws on the continent. What is stopping us? What is the political will that is not enabling us as a continent to understand this importance? When we're looking at data protection and privacy laws, countries that have enacted them, out of 54, 55 countries, it's less than 10. You're talking about the potential benefits it has to transform countries, aligning it to sustainable development goals, but the knowledge transfer, the innovation, all these potential benefits as a continent, as a people, what is stopping us from tapping into this? What is holding us back? It's not an easy answer. I'm not looking for a silver bullet, over to you, Dr. Fayé.
Well, with every country and every company, we have to show them the benefit of collaborating, and that is the financial benefit that comes from it. I think if there's a way we can model and show them that by opening up some of these laws, this is the additional amount of trade, either in volumes or in dollars or whatever it could be, then people sit up the moment they see that dollar sign. So we have to translate the data privacy laws and say that they need to converge as a continent and to actually show what the benefit would be to every single country. I think that's what we have to do.
Okay, sorry, yes, Didier.
I just want to add an additional element. I don't think it's an issue of political will. I rather think it's something, it's a bit a new, those are new concepts for most of the countries, so it takes time to understand what is at stake, how to protect it, and how to find the right balance. Because you'll have two sorts of approach. Some will work to really create a fence, let me call it a digital fence of the data. There are also others who build their frameworks in mind of collaboration with other countries. So it's a process. Generally, there's a lag in terms of policy and regulation. Innovation is coming very fast, but when you look at policy and regulation, they tend to come a little bit later in the process. And all starts, because sometimes it's also fueled by fear. Also, sometimes when you look at these policies, the mindset is let's protect, which is important, no doubt about it, but the element of ensuring that we also work with others, we enlarge our market, is also an important element. So that's why actually capacity building come into play. It's very important that people developing these frameworks, legal or regular frameworks, take into account the broader perspective. So I don't think it's an issue of political will. Of course, there are some countries which are really, in terms of digital maturity, very low. They don't have what we have, for example, here in Rwanda. Infrastructure is still a huge, huge challenge. Capacity, digital literacy, and so on is still a very low level. And when you bring conversation about data protection, is something still very far-fetched. So they don't really feel it's a priority now. But we've seen a lot of countries moving also fast, and there are frameworks. I think capacity building for us has been seen as a very important component in the work we do.
Thank you very much. I'd like to just kindly ask if there are any questions from the audience on this particular topic to our panelists. If you could have a show of hands. No questions at all? Okay, I think we have two here. If we could have the roving microphone.
Thank you, Elise from Gashora Girls. C4R is all about technology advancements such as the fast internet, AI, the use of data analytics, and also cloud computing. So with all these technological improvements, data shared over the internet and data being exchanged in organizations will rapidly increase, right? So my question goes to Didier. How are you going to enforce the privacy of this big data from being subjected to unwanted attentions, for instance, hackers? Thank you.
I think there's another, yes. There's another question.
A student at Rwanda Coding Academy. My question goes to Tesi. If I remember well, she addressed or she touched on this thing of reducing the cost of compliance for startups and youth starting in innovation and having new businesses that they are starting up, and it's a way to help them reduce the friction, as you said. So I believe you did not elaborate on what is being done, and if you allow me, let me broaden the question. Is there anything else that is being done, like apart from reducing the cost of compliance, to help these startups and new businesses that are going to, get into the field? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions before I hand over to Didier and Tesi? Yes.
Okay, thank you. My name is Mkhize Prince from Rwanda Coding Academy. My question goes to the other girl from South Africa. It was about laws. And the question is, how are those data protection dealing with the blockchain? Like, there is this interplanetary file sharing system. Like, how does the law being put in place protect the people's data being shared on the blockchain? And then there is, how will you protect like the jurisdiction in one country, since my data is on my phone and another person in Nigeria also has my data on the blockchain? How do you coordinate that, because they're in different countries? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Anat Levine. I'm from the World Bank. My question is, there are a number of data protection offices that are launching now across Africa, and I know this because we are supporting a whole number of them get operationalized and up and running. What are some ways, and this is a question for anyone on the panel, what are some ways in which you can see these data protection offices help each other and what needs to be put in place so that they can help each other. They are all nascent, they're all establishing themselves, they're all learning as they're going. How can we strengthen the peer-to-peer support that they can provide each other? What do we need to do to make that happen? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll start with the question that was addressed to Didier, Tesi, the one to Mosa, and the last one from the lady from the World Bank. Didier?
Thank you very much. I think that's a good question. I think we're talking about different interventions that need to be put in place, or different actions. Here we've been focusing about data protection and privacy. Very important. Our data is stored, processed, managed, and your control over data, which is one aspect. But I think the question that was brought here is really on the side of now the overall cybersecurity, which to protect the data from unauthorized access by hackers or by other people with different intentions. So data protection alone is not enough. Cybersecurity capabilities is very, very important. And by capabilities, I would like to mention some infrastructure, but also the knowledge that need to be, that people or institution or government need to have to know how to protect the infrastructure, but also the information that they are handling. For example, I'll give the example of Rwanda. Rwanda built about, I think, 8 years ago, a computer emergency response team to protect government infrastructure, but also information systems and in generally information. But it's not enough. The private sector also need to do the same. I think David was here earlier today, is leading that organization, the National Cybersecurity Authority, that coordinates the protection of the cyberspace of Rwanda, and be it public sector and private sector. That's an example. Security operation centers are needed so that you can monitor real time, because those attacks can come from anywhere. They're not only coming from the country, they can come from anywhere, and you need people who are constantly looking at the cyberspace so that they can take measures to enforce the protection, or at least to counterattack, you know, if there is a major incident trying to affect some of our infrastructure, or to defend them better. Third is cooperation, because nature of cybersecurity is majority, actually, based on statistics of issues or cybersecurity incidents, are not coming from Rwanda. They're coming from outside Rwanda. We talk about all the countries around the globe. So cooperation is very important. When something happens, an issue happens, the National Cybersecurity Authority here need to be in position to talk to government, to other government or other institutions to track these activities, and also to stop them. But also, I think the legal framework always comes, because for all of this to happen, you need to have a proper legal framework in place. So I just wanted to add the second element that we didn't cover in this panel today, which is really cybersecurity at large, as a complement to the data protection efforts which are taking place.
Thank you, Didier. And I hope the young lady's question has been answered. Tesi?
Thank you. So I'll start with the context that the previous panel gave, that I think it was Allah who talked about. There's a time frame for supporting everyone, all the different stakeholders, to understand what that new law is and how it works. And there's a lot of support that, and especially even with the Data Protection Office, how to enforce that and so on. So I think one is, as the legal and regulatory with the law, and as these initiatives come into implementation, it will set the baseline for where we are today. So that's the first step, which I think is very important, is that clarity. Now that we have the law, how do we communicate now to the different stakeholders? Now for startups, there's existing support systems within the ecosystem. The first one is, for example, the incubators and different programs that support them. I think this is a very important channel that we need to use to make sure that they're also aware, because if you're supporting technology companies and everyone is telling you how they're going to leverage data to transform, something in agriculture, beyond helping them figure out the business model and validating validating their ideas, I think we're going to have to now understand how do we actually also support on a regulatory front. How do you navigate the data protection law? Today people do it for taxes, but this is going to be, I think this is now going to be the next frontier. How do we support them to do that? Schools as well, universities. I think one of the so I went to business school. In business school, what we were being taught was how do you monetize data, and so a lot of people were thinking about monetizing data and at what cost. No one ever talked about the cost of monetizing data. It was more about how do you monetize data. And now I think that conversation needs to shift. If you're teaching engineers, if you're training anyone, even in business school and in law school, I think the conversation now needs to shift around some of these conversations, around consent, around protecting data, around securing data. Also because the costs have risen. Before, I think in the past few years, we've not had significant costs if you don't do it. In fact, people were rewarded if you didn't do it because no one was monitoring it. Now the legal framework has changed. So that also has to, within schools, it's important that all these principles are also shared so that we're building a generation that's actually thinking alongside the values that the law is trying to support and to implement. So I think those are the critical ways, including it into what's already being done, but starting at from schools to the incubators to people who are investing, and then of course all that is within the broader framework of the law and the Data Protection Office and other institutions like the government.
Thank you, Tesi. Mosa?
Thank you for the question. I think, the reality is that technology is accelerating at a much faster pace than regulations can keep up with, right? And blockchain is one of them. And I think all of the topics that we've discussed today touch in many respects, including on blockchain. So the challenge is there are multiple sides to this challenge. The first one is, how industry can actually organize themselves. And the last time that I checked, I know that there were more, associations being established within a number of jurisdictions, and they were actually looking to combine and organize themselves so that they could actually then have these discussions that are much, whether it's regionally or continentally. That's part of the problem, right? The next problem is then part of the challenge is for those associations to actually bring to government's attention what the challenges actually are. Again, it's around governments, partnerships, private sector and NGOs really seeing how to work around these issues, because all of them are new. None of them are, they're all novel challenges, they're all novel developments, and in order for them to be, in order for regulatory frameworks to be developed, they have to make sure that all of these varying stakeholders actually, come together and inform what it is that would ultimately create an ecosystem that will thrive. So, yeah, that would be my response to that question.
Dr. Fayé, do you want to respond to his other question on different jurisdictions? He had a question on the different jurisdictions when it comes to data.
Blockchain. The part of the issue I find also, when you start pushing blockchain and it has to now cross, country boundaries, how do you make sure that there is some consistency in actually some of the algorithms that people have used, and to make sure that, they still end up with equivalent values. I think that area is still, I think it's maybe some research work still needs to be done in that area. But most of the blockchain, I think, tend to remain more within a country and a lot of the effort. Although some people are now beginning to develop, how do you connect a number of all these blockchains together across different countries and to make sure that they can still have the same value. I think that's some work. Probably you see products coming out, in the next couple of years in that area, right? Okay.
Mark, I don't know if you'd like to take the last question that the lady asked regarding the data offices across different parts of the continent that are popping up, that are coming through. What is your opinion on what can be done to facilitate them to work better together in terms of synergy and productivity in their respective countries regarding data access and data sharing?
It's really all about collaboration, sharing best practices, and having more or less, like I'll probably say, reusable templates across both of them. Across most of these countries, right? Because if you look at it, right, it's a common problem they're all trying to solve for, right? Which is, okay, how do we basically make sure that we're controlling the access to this data, and that that control sits within the hands of the customer or the consumer, and how do we make sure that their privacy rights are not being violated, right? So if they're trying to solve for the same set of problems, I think it's really more around rather than trying to reinvent the wheel across each of those offices. We just need to basically have a way to enhance collaboration and best practice sharing across the various offices that have been established.
Didier, you wanted to say something?
Yes, thank you. I just want to add on what he has just responded, just to say that there are also some structure being put in place in different parts of the continent. I think I mentioned the network of data protection authorities, the network of African data protection authorities with whom we work. There's also Africa Data Data Leadership Initiative. Those two initiatives are initiatives that focus on data protection, data privacy, but also data governance in general. So Smart Africa work directly and support those two initiatives, and it also involves peer learning between the different data protection authorities. So that's maybe a conversation that we can have also to see how we can strengthen the existing.
Thank you very much. I think that's it for now. We really need to try and stick to the time allocated to us. But please help me give a very, very warm round of applause to our panelists, our esteemed panelists. And I would like to kindly invite you to take your seats. Thank you very much. The next part of the program I'm going to introduce is a short video. If the technical team can just prep it. And this video showcases some of the brilliant work but by someone who's been called a visionary innovator, Mr. Ali Parsa, through the creation of the company Babylon Health. So if I could just ask you to look to your screens and ask the tech team to play the video. Thank you.
Everything we understand about technology is melting into air, and new realities are being invented. Even if we look at what we have today, we have quantum computers that are coming to age that are 100 million-fold faster than the fastest computers we have. We have edge computing, we have connectivity that are 100-fold faster than what we have in 5G, and 6G will be 100-fold faster than that. We have a prescriptive analytics rather than predictive analytics. We're going to have augmented reality, virtual reality that will change everything that we see and do, and we have robotic computing and robotic presence that will take what is in the cyber into the physical. The Fourth Industrial Revolution will change all the realities as we know it about technology. The Fourth Industrial Revolution will have profound effects on healthcare. What we call healthcare today really is misnamed. It's sick care. We wait for people to get ill and we then deal with their illness episodically. We're now going to move into a world in which we can continuously collect data on people in real time, continuously analyze it, predict what is going to happen to them, to intervene early, to prevent. That movement from sick care to healthcare, from episodic to continuous, from physical to virtual, and from reactive to proactive is something to be super excited about. The Industrial Revolution provides emerging economies like Africa with a unique opportunity. Countries who do not have the vested interest, the legacy of the old models of care, or the old models of technology or delivery of anything, have the opportunity to reinvent how the reality and the future should be based on the potentials and the possibilities of what technology provides for us today, rather than the legacy of what we carry with us from yesterday. I am so excited that the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution in Africa is hosted in Rwanda, one of my favorite countries on the planet. Rwanda has the opportunity, together with the center, to reinvent the relationship between the private and the public sector as we define the Fourth Industrial Revolution. The regulatory environment, the policy environment, the relationship between different parties that can materialize the realities of the future. I couldn't be more excited to be involved in the effort that is being made by the Fourth Industrial Revolution Center in Rwanda.
That was a great message from Mr. Ali Parsa on the launch of today's Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution in Rwanda. Like he said, we truly, really are living in the fourth industrial age. And now I would like to invite the next speaker here on the stage, Mr. Odas Niyonkuru, who is the CEO of Digital Umuganda, as he shares another perspective on the power of data. He will share insights on the importance of African language data sets and democratizing access, voice technology, providing some concrete examples of NLP, neuro-linguistic programming applications in the Rwandan context. Mr. Odas, a warm welcome to you. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me. It's late in the afternoon, so I'll try to be very brief. I'll want to start by survey. Out of the audience, how many people have an iPhone? So quite a few number. How many people have an Android? The majority as well. So if you have an iPhone, you've probably used Siri. If you have an Android, you've probably used Google Assistant. And these technologies are widely spread across the world. However, they cannot work in African languages. And the reason is there's no infrastructure for African languages. And let me paint a picture. Swahili has 200 million speakers. Danish, on the other hand, has 6 million speakers. Yet Swahili has a lower infrastructure than Danish. So what can we do about it? Over the past 3 years, since 2019, we've been using a concept called Umuganda. If you're not Rwandese or haven't been here the last Saturday of the month, I'll explain. Umuganda is a concept where community comes together and solves a problem. It might be a road that needs to be fixed, it might be a classroom that needs to be renovated, or anything in the community needs. So we were wondering, how can we adopt this to the digital age? How can we use it to build digital infrastructure? Infrastructure such as data sets for AI, and specifically for African languages. So over the past 3 years, we've been coming together through community efforts and donating voice, and hence building a Kinyarwanda voice data set. And where has this impact been seen? Take 2019, Kinyarwanda was nowhere on the map of AI. Today is the second largest open data set in the world. So what's the significance of this? I want to share with you a couple of examples of what this will mean. Imagine a person living with disability trying to access e-government services on a normal screen. They won't be able to, right? Because it's text-based. However, with a Kinyarwanda screen reader, they'll be able to access this information. Also, the African Trade Agreement has been talked about today a lot. So imagine a Rwandan trader trying to trade with a counterpart at the other end of the continent. However, there are over 7,000 languages in Africa. But through speech translation, this will be a possibility, hence enabling the African Free Trade Agreement to come to life. So what do we need to get there? We need to make sure that entrepreneurs, African entrepreneurs, are equipped with the right data sets, that they're able to tap in the $26 billion market that the voice technology industry will be in 2026. And that we have the right regulation and the right infrastructure, and that data is freely available for this to happen. So join me in making data available for everyone. Thank you.
AI is the premier emerging technology of the 21st century. Without AI, many of the other things that we think about as emerging technologies really cannot take place. For example, IoT devices collect data, but without running AI over that data, you're not getting any benefits. Autonomous vehicles need AI to actually be able to drive on the roads. It is impossible if a business wants to survive for it not to have a plan to understand AI and deploy AI safely, ethically, and responsibly. The platform's core activities are around the governance of this technology so that we can accelerate the benefits whilst also considering the challenges: privacy, accountability, transparency, bias, and safety. And the purpose is really to think about what are the big issues, what are those global issues in artificial intelligence that really require something done in the governance area so that AI can flourish. And so all of our projects address both the benefits and seek to mitigate those challenges. So we have a project called Empowering AI Leadership. The idea behind this is that companies do not, on the whole, know enough about artificial intelligence and the impacts for good and ill that AI might have on their company. We have created 12 modules which help boards of directors to really have proper oversight of the use of artificial intelligence and be able to guide the C-suite to think about putting in the relevant guardrails for the use of AI. All the work that we do, whether the work is led by companies or whether the work's led by governments, it's always multi-stakeholder. It is really important that we have this global conversation about the use of artificial intelligence, as well as for countries themselves to look at how they're going to use it and how they're going to grow their own AI economy. It's really difficult to regulate, so we're very much advocating this sort of soft law approach, thinking about standards and guidelines rather than looking to regulation. The forum has this unique opportunity to work with everybody across the globe. It's that richness of the multi-stakeholder community that is going to be able to tackle some of the challenges that we have in really constructing the framework for the 21st century.